So, let's see. At this point, I've made a couple of videos focusing on the character of Goblin Slayer. I also feel like I've spent a good amount of time on the characters of Sword Maiden, Priestess, and Cowgirl, but I think there are still plenty of other characters that inhabit the world of Goblin Slayer that are worth taking some time to talk about. Ones that I just couldn't really squeeze into other videos. So I decided to group them together and make one big video focusing on the rest of the extended cast. Now, there are quite a few of these characters, but I'm going to try my best to keep it quick so I can get through them all without stretching this video super long. Some I will be spending more time on than others, but I'm obviously not going to be as thorough as I was with Goblin Slayer. I'll mostly just be covering the highlights, the standout details that I myself found the most interesting. But before I actually start going over the characters, there's been a very obvious element I haven't really bothered to address yet. I figured now, being right before I go over the majority of the characters, would be the best time to point it out. The thing I'm referring to is, of course, that all of the characters in this show lack conventional names. Rather, they're referred to by their role or their job, like you have with Goblin Slayer or Priestess. Now personally, I like this aspect. I think it's a really unique touch. And one reason I'm particularly keen to this element is probably because I would totally have been referring to the characters like this anyway. See, I'm the type of person who is absolutely horrible with remembering names. So, normally, I just make up simple, straightforward nicknames for the characters of the shows I'm watching. You know, I key into one particular detail like their special power, the weapon they use, some key aspect of their personality, or just hair color, you know, 'cause anime. It's just easier for me that way. With Goblin Slayer, though, I can skip that because it basically just does it for me. The Goblin Slayer is Goblin Slayer. The Priestess is Priestess. Now, I have talked to some people who don't like this element. And from discussing it a bit with them, the common reason seems to be that they felt like it dehumanized the characters a bit, and made it harder to relate to them. This obviously wasn't the case for me. To me, it doesn't really matter what a character is called. A name is just a way to refer to the character. It's their thoughts and actions in the story that define them. A name does not make a character. And I have seen some very interesting interpretations for why this whole lack of a name thing is a thing. One interpretation that I came across that I found pretty intriguing is that the whole lack of a name thing is because we, the audience, are experiencing the world through Goblin Slayer's skewed perception of it. He is the main character. This could be how he recognizes the people around him. Think about it. I mean, in my other videos, I've emphasized how he's very focused on efficiency. So identifying people by the roles they fill and the jobs they can perform, rather than something like their name, would make a lot of sense for him. It's also yet another way for him to put some emotional distance between him and the people around him, so he can avoid growing too personally attached to them and not risk the potential pain that would come with losing them. Okay, maybe that one is stretching it a bit, but I thought it was a cool idea nonetheless. It is also just cool to think that this is a world that functions without conventional names. So, with that out of the way, let's actually start going over some characters. In the after-credits scene of episode 2, we were introduced to a party of 3 adventurers searching for Goblin Slayer so they can ask for his help on a quest. These 3 would go on to become regulars of the show and join Goblin Slayer and Priestess on several adventures throughout the rest of the series. The most prominent of these 3 would definitely be High Elf Archer. Right away, an interesting thing to note about her is that despite her looks, she is by far the oldest of all the major characters, sitting at about 2,000 years old. This is because she's an elf, and elves don't age normally, which is a pretty typical fantasy logic. However, despite her long life, I hesitate to say that she's the most experienced. This is displayed right away in her first meeting with Goblin Slayer. She is quick to criticize his lowly appearance. However, one of her party mates then points out how Goblin Slayer's choice of equipment is actually very well thought out and practical. High Elf Archer is also kind of hot-headed and doesn't seem to have much restraint. Overall, she acts much closer to the age she appears to be, rather than that of her actual age. Which actually does kind of tap into a topic I find interesting. That being how fictional beings with extended lives experience time differently from normal humans. I mean, think about it. For someone who lives thousands of years, something like a decade would be, what, like the equivalent of a long weekend for them? And it kind of taps into the idea that it's not always about how much time you have, but how you use the time that you have. It's explained that for a long time she's never left her comfy little home in the forest. You can tell High Elf Archers lived kind of a sheltered lifestyle. And something we see in the show is that she left her home with some rather idealistic expectations of what adventuring is like. As she puts it, adventures to her are all about the joy in experiencing the unknown and discovering new wonders. They should leave you feeling happy, accomplished, and proud. But we've seen before how this kind of view is treated by this show. Her first mission with Goblin Slayer clearly does not go the way she thought it would. She ends up having to sit out for a moment to vomit after seeing the condition of one of the goblin's victims. Goblin Slayer tells her if she can't handle it, she should just leave. Which may seem harsh, but this is Goblin Slayer. He's just trying to be practical. But if this scene didn't make it obvious, Goblin Slayer and Elf Archer have kind of a rocky relationship at first. It is shown that she is still rather intrigued by him, but they clearly have very different ideologies. Anyway, Elf Archer remains firm on completing their mission. And as the mission goes on, she seems to start looking past just how he does things and more into why he does things. I can't help but recall this one moment where she and Goblin Slayer are going around killing some goblins in their sleep. She's having trouble and looks over to Goblin Slayer, sees that he's using the goblin's own weapons to kill them, and figures out he's doing so because he doesn't want to wear out his own. There is reason to his peculiar tactics. And man, just look at that dead-eyed face she has in this scene. I think that alone is enough to assume she's starting to get why Goblin Slayer isn't so warm and cheery. Also, this thought just occurred to me, but perhaps because she uses primarily a bow, a long-range weapon, I guess she wouldn't be that used to getting this close to her victims or this bloody, so I guess this kind of thing would probably be extra uncomfortable for her. Now, this whole experience doesn't, completely shift her mindset into this dark and brooding character like Goblin Slayer, but it does seem to toughen her up to the horrors of the world a bit. And I want to say this clearly. This show is not completely against optimism. It doesn't want to stomp it out. It just wants to make clear sometimes things will work out and other times shit will happen. Going into things with too much optimism can be dangerous. But if you focus too much on the bad, you can lose sight of the good that's also out there. After coming to better understand this side of adventuring, she becomes determined to show Goblin Slayer her way, the part of adventuring that is fun and exciting. In this way, I do think she is a good influence on him. Next up, I guess I'll talk about Dwarf Shaman, one of the other members in High Elf Archer's party. Honestly, he's not one of those characters I feel like dissecting too thoroughly. He's kind of the wise old man of the group. Although, as she gleefully points out in the show, Elf Archer is actually older. However, while she may be older than him, as I said before, she seems to have lived a rather sheltered life, while he actually seems to be very well traveled and experienced. So he does still come across as the elder of the group. He's actually very patient, understanding, and empathetic. I mean, we see this side of him right away when he sticks up for Goblin Slayer to High Elf Archer after she berates him. And I guess that's about all I have to say about him. So for the final member of the trio, we have Lizard Priest. He's a lizard man, if you couldn't tell. And he's a pretty chill and cool guy, which especially works with the whole, giant lizard guy thing he's got going on. It's a nice contrast. He's one of those gentle giant type characters, at least until he needs to massacre some goblins. I think his obsession with cheese is pretty funny. I guess the one thing I really want to highlight about him is his power set. His magic is without a doubt my favorite in the series. He basically calls upon the power of his dead ancestors to assist him, which I guess is supposed to tie into the whole Native American thing he's got going on. But because he's a lizard man, his ancestors are, of course, dinosaurs. For those wondering, let me confirm that I was indeed the type of kid that obsessed over dinosaurs, and have indeed watched Jurassic Park more times than I can probably count. This just gets my inner child screaming for joy. Plus, his life goal is to become a dragon. I don't really know what else to say here. Giant lizards are just cool on a base level. Okay, so let's move on. Another character that GS often interacts with while on the job is Guild Girl. She's basically a reception lady for the guild. And actually, she's pretty much the main representative of the guild that we see in the series. Honestly, I really struggled to find something I wanted to talk about with her. I will say, I do just really like seeing her work her job. Seriously, I think it can get pretty damn relatable if you've ever worked in customer service. I feel like there's so many scenes I could bring up as examples, but if I had to pick one, I'm gonna go with this one.
There was this troll, right? A huge sucker. But I was able to dodge his attacks. Got him with my spear before he knew what hit him.
Oh wow, nicely done, sir. I'm well aware that trolls are powerful foes and that I should be impressed by this.
This scene just cracks me up every time. I love her total deadpan delivery. Like, this kind of thing just happens to her so much that she just has this response to the situation memorized. And of course, she needs to keep up the customer smile. And you can just still tell how unimpressed she is by his boasting. Again, she must hear these kind of things all the time, but of course, she can't say that directly. He's one of the guild's moneymakers after all. Then she completely sidesteps his advances and uses the opportunity to sell him shit. But yeah, I guess that's about all I have to say with her, so... The next character I'm going to be talking about is Cowgirl's uncle. He's Cowgirl's de facto guardian after, the whole Goblin incident, and is also Goblin Slayer's landlord. Now, a big trait of Cowgirl's uncle is that he's a bit protective of Cowgirl, which is completely understandable considering what happened to her parents. And this is why he tries to convince Cowgirl to distance herself from Goblin Slayer. Early into the series, he talks with Cowgirl and tells her how he thinks Goblin Slayer may not be the same person whom she grew up knowing. That the incident that destroyed their village changed him. He doesn't want her to be hurt. I do wonder, though, if this is more because he thinks Goblin Slayer might, have some kind of mental break and physically harm her, or perhaps he too has realized that because of the dangerous life he leads, Goblin Slayer is most likely going to die one day, and that would be the thing that would crush her. He's not overly pushy about it, though. He willingly backs off when she says that she's going to continue their relationship as is and give him some more time, which I'm glad for. It keeps him from crossing that line of being a jerk. He's not trying to force her, he's just giving her his honest advice. A lot of fictional parents can come across as irritating by being too pushy and forceful. I mean, he still allows Goblin Slayer to stay at the farm despite this. The reason he gives for this is that Goblin Slayer brings in a lot of extra profit by paying rent, but I also can't help but think that it's also because he does clearly see that Cowgirl cares about him, so keeping him close and providing him with amenities obviously makes her happy. Her happiness seems to be the most important thing to him. They have this nice one-on-one conversation together in episode 11.
She's a good girl, Despite everything, she's grown up so well. Keep her safe. You got it?
I'll try my best, sir.
I think he comes to realize that the desire to protect Cowgirl and her happiness is something that they both have in common. Now let's see, I think I've covered most of the big ones, but there are still a couple of other reoccurring characters in the show. Let's get back to talking about some other members of the Adventurers Guild. Let's see, there's the Witch. She's actually notable to me in being the only guild member from the start to actually get along with Goblin Slayer somewhat. She states how she had helped him out with that magic scroll, the same one he used to kill that ogre. She also gives Priestess some advice early on when she's having some doubts over her partnership with Goblin Slayer. And there was that time she gave a magic item to those newbies to help them find their missing sword. So yeah, just a very nice, helpful character overall. I will say the particular way she talks is something I go back and forth on. It can get kind of annoying sometimes, but also some other times I don't really mind it, and I don't know. Although I do like to imagine that her strange speech is because of whatever she's constantly smoking in that pipe. Then, of course, there's her partner, Spearman. Now, this guy can come across as pretty cocky and full of himself, but, I mean, he is shown to be able to hold his own in a fight, so he can back up his big talk. He actually seems to have a thing for Guild Girl and is seen trying to flirt with her several times. But as I've already shown, she really isn't interested. Now, while I think he can come across as like one of those jerk characters at first, he does have a couple of redeeming moments. I mean, he's the first person to speak up and rally the other guild members when Goblin Slayer asks for their help in the finale, after he realizes just how desperate Goblin Slayer is. This is the type of character that could have easily come across as too annoying and unlikable to me, but I think there's enough nuance to his character where he comes across okay. Let's see. Next, I guess I'll talk about the, heavy warrior. You know, big sword guy. The one whose design is obviously a reference to Guts from Berserk. So Heavy Warrior, and his regular adventuring partner, the female knight. They have some interesting banter here and there, and I guess they do get some character development, at least as far as their opinion of Goblin Slayer goes. But I'll be honest, they feel just shy of being complete background characters, so I do think it's kind of touching how they take this group of newbie adventurers under their wing and, train them. Hey, I got a good laugh out of this scene. Oh yeah, speaking of newbie adventurers, there's also these two. Man, what were these two called? Honestly, I'd just call these two the newbies, but I guess I'll look up what they're actually called. Apprentice, Cleric, and Rookie Warrior. Now, these two are interesting because they actually have an episode that puts them in the spotlight. And I really liked that episode. It had the purpose of giving the audience an idea of what normal beginner work is for adventurers. You know, those that actually listen to the advice of Guild Girl and don't overconfidently charge into a goblin den. And we see that beginner work basically entails killing giant rats and bugs. Again, I actually really like how they kind of portray adventuring as a real career. Like, it isn't all this glorious hero work. It can be boring, it can be hard, it can just be downright unappealing. But hey, that's work. Surprisingly, despite playing such minor roles, we actually do get to see a bit of development from them over the season. We see them learn and become more confident as adventurers. That, and they have an interesting relationship with Goblin Slayer. They're the ones who tried to pull Priestess away from him in episode 3.
Something seems off about him. He's silver ranked, but all he ever wants to do is kill goblins. Silvers would usually go for bigger prey than that.
I've heard that he's just dragging beginners around to use as goblin bait.
But then in episode 5, they find themselves having trouble completing one of their quests and end up getting some useful advice from Goblin Slayer.
You mean Goblin Slayer?
Is that a problem?
I don't think he'd help us.
Yeah, we've said some pretty rude stuff about him before, so...
I wouldn't worry. I'm not sure he even notices that sort of thing.
Then in episode 11, we see these two actually stand up and volunteer to help him fight off the Goblin army.
So,
What's wrong?
just that I haven't ever slain any goblins before.
Well, it is pretty dangerous.
But I'm thinking that now would be the perfect time to start.
You're right. We do owe him, after all.
And hey, the guy actually managed to get his first Goblin kill. Cool. Okay. Pretty much done. There are a few more characters, but honestly though, they're like the most minor of minor characters. So rather than taking the time to talk about them, I'm just gonna toss them up on screen real quick and call it done. Okay, now I think I'm satisfied. What can I say? I'm a completionist. With that, I think I'm about tapped out. One last time, I just want to emphasize how much I love this cast of characters. There are some shows that struggle to make me even like just a few of the characters. Here, though, I struggled to find one that I didn't have a nice thing to say about. That's a solid feat.
Everyone here tonight, they all helped. Remember that in the future. People are kind.
So now, I feel like I can pretty confidently say I've covered all of the characters of this show now. But there are still plenty of other parts of this show worth analyzing. I still have plenty more Goblin Slayer videos coming up, so keep an eye out for those.
The Goblin Slayer swung his blade, fierce wretchedness he now would purify. Goblin corpses he cut through as the heads flew high. Oh, courageous warrior, with a sword that's tempered in perfect silver, never will the blade betray its purpose or its way.